All right, everyone, we'll get started now. I'd like to start by introducing myself. I'm Dr. Radlisha Sneed. I'm faculty with the MPH program at Michigan State University. I also co-lead the Workforce Development Committee of the Master of Public Health Program, which is bringing you this presentation today. I'm joined by three of my colleagues, and I'm going to give them the opportunity to introduce themselves. Mark, do you want to start?
Sure, I'm Mark Belichick. I also co-chair the Workforce Development Committee, and I'm faculty at MSU in the public health program, and also teach a course in the medical school called Public Health Partners in Medicine. And I also, as you can see, am maybe in the background, teach at the University of Michigan.
Bob.
Hey, Bob Wall. I'm also faculty at the Department of Public Health, and I'm in the MPH program. Also, I teach epidemiology and I teach public health methods course. And let's see. So I was at the State Health Department, Michigan Department of Health and Human Services for a long time, environmental health and chronic disease. So I've written lots of grants and stuff. So that's me.
Thanks, Bob. Gail?
Hi, everyone. My name is Gail Ship. I'm actually newer to the Department of Public Health, and I'm under the Pediatric Public Health Initiative. I'm new incoming faculty, so it'll be a year in August for me. And I've done a few grants, being that I've during my doctoral phase, postdoctoral phase, a lot of my work is centered around maternal and infant health equity, particularly around breastfeeding related disparities. And so I'm happy to join you all today.
Thanks, everyone. So our plan for today is first, I'm going to do a presentation that just kind of gives you an introduction to the different ways that we write about grants. I'll talk to you a little bit about the different mechanisms that are used in grant writing, especially the writing that actually happens before you submit a full proposal. And then we'll also talk about how you approach program officers that work with funding agencies and how you talk to them potentially about your idea. After that, we're going to go into breakout sessions that the four of us will be leading. And we'll give you an example of sort of how to create a one-pager that describes your idea. And you'll also get an opportunity to work with us to kind of go through that structure related to an idea that you might have. So we'll be asking a few volunteers to kind of walk through a project that you're interested in developing. And so it really just gives you a perfect opportunity to have somebody work with you on your idea. And so we'll do that till about 11:30. And like I mentioned, this session is recorded, and we will provide you with written materials, including a copy of the PowerPoint presentation that I gave today. Does anyone have any questions before we get started?
Well, Alicia, I did receive one question. I know you said that the session is being recorded, but I think they wanted to know if they'll receive the actual recording, or how will that be shared with the participants?
So all the participants will get an email after the session that includes the recording as well as the handouts. So I'll send you a link to a YouTube video, basically, is what I'll do. Any other questions? All right, let's get started then. All right, so today we're talking about how to write about your grant idea. And some folks may not realize that there's actually some pre-writing that's really necessary before you write a full grant proposal. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about the importance of doing this pre-writing and the different ways that you can do it. All right, so there are a lot of reasons that you should write about your grant idea, and I'm going to talk about each of these in detail But these are a few of the reasons why it's really important for you to write about your idea before you actually go into writing a proposal. First, you really want to be able to think through your idea from beginning to end, and writing about your idea really helps you to do that. Second, it often helps you to really identify the resources that you might need for your work. So we often need lots of resources, both human and financial, to do our work, and writing it down kind of helps you to think through what those resources might be. Writing about your project also helps you to get feedback on your idea from colleagues. It helps you to introduce your project to people that you might want to collaborate with. And most importantly, it also gets you feedback from program officers. And we're going to talk about how you actually go about soliciting that feedback. And then finally, many grant mechanisms actually require you to write about your idea before you actually submit a full proposal. And so these are some of the really important reasons why it's important to think about, what am I trying to do and how can I express that in a really concise way so that people will understand what I want to do and help me to determine if it's a feasible idea. All right, so when we're thinking about writing about your idea, one of the things that it's good for is that it really helps you to get specific. So we often have sort of a murky idea in our heads about what we want to do, but we don't often upfront think about the details of what that might look like. And so writing about your idea kind of forces you to think about those details and how you'll actually get from point A to point B. So for example, a generic way to think about your idea might be, I want to start a program to teach kids in the community how to cook. Something very simple that's sort of a really broad statement that you make about what it is that you want to do. When you take some time, you can really get specific and hone in on what kind of program you want to develop. Who are you going to recruit for the program and what's the purpose of it? So a more specific way to say this would be, we're going to recruit and enroll 50 children ages 8 to 13 to participate in cooking classes at the Culinary Institute. And these students are going to be paired with a culinary arts student to complete a 6-week program focused on safety, portion control, nutrition, and meal planning. So as you're thinking about your idea, as you write it out, it really helps you to get specific about what you're trying to do. So one of the reasons we write about our ideas is so that we can go from the generic to the specific. Another reason that it's important to write about your idea is that it really helps you to think through the resources that will be needed to carry out your work. And so whenever you're proposing any kind of program or research idea, you're going to need both human and financial resources. So depending on what kind of organization you come from, you may need to identify a partner who can do a lot of the fiscal administration. So you might need a fiduciary who can receive and dispense funds for you. You may need to partner with community members or other institutions. You may decide you want to work with university partners. And so kind of writing out what you want to do helps you to think about who the people are that you'll need to work with. You might also need people to help recruit participants for your program. So really thinking about those resources up front is ideal in order to design a program that's fundable. Another reason we write about our grant ideas is to get feedback on our ideas. And so the best way to really get a good proposal going is to get feedback from lots of people. So you want to be able to show your idea to people that you trust. So you may not want to show it to everyone, but certainly if you have colleagues that you work with whose opinions you value, you'll want to get their feedback before you submit a full proposal. So you'll want to find out from them if your idea makes sense. Is it something that can be easily followed? Because if your colleagues can't follow what your idea is, then the people who fund programs probably won't be able to follow either. So you want to make sure that your idea makes sense from beginning to end, and getting feedback from people is important. Oftentimes getting that feedback is also useful because your colleagues can help you determine if your approach is the best one. So you may have an idea for how to implement a program, but your colleagues might be able to tell you about an idea that could be a better fit, or that might be easier to implement. And so getting that feedback is really important, and getting it as early as possible is especially important. Additionally, if you get feedback from colleagues, they can kind of give you some insight into whether other people in your community are already doing work similar to what you described. And so I've seen this happen a few times, and even in work that I've done, where I'll have an idea and someone will tell me, oh, there's a group that does that already in the city. And so that's important to know. I don't want to propose something that someone else is already doing. And so my goal is going to be to either identify ways in which my proposal stands out or might be different from what other people are already doing, or I might want to collaborate with the people who are already doing the work, so that efforts don't get duplicated. And so writing about your idea and being able to show it to people often helps you to really think about who else is doing work in the space that you're doing work. Another reason we like to write about our ideas is that it's important really to introduce your project to people who might collaborate with you. Usually when I propose projects, they require commitments from lots of different types of people. So I might have an evaluator who's helping to evaluate the program. I might work with analysts who will analyze data for me. And so I want to introduce the idea to people who might potentially work with me, and writing about your idea helps you to do that. So people who are going to collaborate with you often will ask you to see your idea in writing. And so your ability to actually show them your idea in writing shows them that you're serious about actually doing this work.
Dehydrated and she can't keep
Um,
you keep on throwing up.
Can everyone please put themselves on mute if you're not already? Thank you. So writing about your idea shows people that you're serious. And it also shows people that you have a clear understanding of what you're trying to do and that you can articulate it to other people. And having that ability is crucial if you're going to decide to submit a project proposal. And then finally, having your idea in writing helps people to decide whether or not they actually want to commit to your project and give you a letter of support, which is crucial for any project that you might develop. Additionally, it's really important to write about your idea because many funding agencies actually require you to submit some kind of pre-proposal before you actually submit a full proposal. I've submitted to several foundations that actually don't let all applicants complete a full proposal. Often they'll have you submit a letter of intent or a concept paper or something like that. And then based on the quality of what you submit, they invite a limited number of applicants to submit a full proposal. So it's important to get comfortable in doing this kind of pre-writing because funders are often requiring it to ensure that what you're interested in doing is in line with their goals and their mission. And then finally, one of the most important reasons to write about your idea is that you want to get feedback from program officers. So all funding agencies have individuals who are part of the organization that respond to applicants who are interested in getting funding. And so these program officers are people whose job it is to make sure that the funding agency has the best portfolio of programs that they can possibly have. And so usually they ask you to submit something in writing so that you can have a conversation with them about your idea to determine the suitability of your idea for whatever grant mechanism that they might have. And so you really want to get this feedback before you submit a proposal. And so I want to talk a little bit now just about how you actually talk about your idea with a program officer. And I'll start by mentioning that there are grant mechanisms where program officers are not allowed to talk to you, depending on what kind of agency it is, especially sometimes federal agencies may not be able to talk to you, but often many program officers are allowed to talk to applicants. And so you want to talk to program officers in some way before you actually submit a proposal. You don't want to just submit your proposal blindly. And so many grant programs do pre-proposal webinars or Q&A sessions where they invite potential applicants to come to a Zoom meeting, and they kind of talk about the process of applying for grants with their organization. And so if that's the case with the particular funder that you're working with, you want to make sure that you attend those. Those give you an opportunity to directly ask questions about the potential funding mechanism and give you an opportunity for program officers to share tips with you. You want to get as much face time with program officers as possible because you can often get shortcuts that really save you time. Program officers often tell me that they want to hear from you before you submit, and they can tell you all kinds of things. So they can tell you about any grants that they want to fund right now. Typically, most funding agencies have a mission and they're interested in serving a certain population, or they're interested in a certain topic. And so you want to know that from them before you submit your idea. You know, if you're, for example, writing a grant that's focused on school-age children and the funder is really interested in older adults, then that's not going to be a good match. And so you want to be able to make sure that your idea is consistent with the priorities of that agency. The program officers can also help you to identify strengths and weaknesses in your idea. So by talking to program officers about your idea, they'll tell you to perhaps think about something else that you might not have thought about, or they'll tell you a little bit more about what they're interested in terms of the methods that you're using for your work. Program officers can also really tell you what to emphasize in your application. And I can't stress this enough. It's really important for you to know what the funder cares about, because the goal is not necessarily to fund 100% the exact thing that you want to do. The goal is also to make sure that the work that you're doing is a match for their organization. And so program officers will often tell you what you should emphasize in your application. I worked on a project once and I called a program officer and she said to me, we really want to see that you have incorporated this health model that we're using into your application. So it will be helpful to you if you kind of walk through the steps of this health model and how your work maps onto this health model. And so I made sure that I did that. I got a copy of the model that they were interested in, and I made a point of talking about the model throughout the concept paper that I submitted. So program officers will tell you things like that all of the time. They'll also tell you if your idea is suitable for their portfolio. And so I mentioned this already a little bit, but usually program officers are responsible for specific types of grants. So it may be that they're interested in funding grants to academic institutions, but you don't know that. And so you submit it to this program officer when you shouldn't. And so what they'll often do is, send you to another program officer who might be responsible for the type of grant that you're rating. And you'll only know that because you've had conversations with them. And then finally, they'll tell you if you are eligible to get grants from them. So some organizations only fund nonprofits, some only fund universities, some require that your entity has been doing work in the community for a certain number of years. There are lots of different types of requirements that foundations and other types of granting organizations have in terms of eligibility. And so having that conversation with the program officer really helps you to figure out if you're even eligible for the award that they're issuing. All right, so before you can write your full proposal, there's a lot of different ways in which you can write about your idea. So you can write what's known as a letter of intent or inquiry or interest. You may submit something called a concept paper or a pre-proposal, or you may just want to write a one-page summary of your idea. And so I want to talk a little bit about the differences between these. All right, so I'm going to talk about the different ways that you can write about your idea and give you some examples of each. All right, so the one thing that you can do to write about your idea is to submit something known as a letter of intent or a letter of interest or a letter of inquiry. They're all LOIs, but basically the purpose of these is to convey your attention to apply for funding. So these are usually 1 to 3 pages. You may be asked to tell the funders how much money you need to do your work. And these are really very brief overviews of your project. Usually in the letter of inquiry, you want to indicate why your project's important, how it might benefit the community, and why your organization is uniquely qualified to do the work. So these usually are not very long, but they're just sort of to give the funder a sneak peek into what they can hope to see from you in a full proposal. The other type of writing that you might be asked to do is something called a concept paper. And this is usually more detailed than a letter of intent. And typically funders ask very specific questions in concept papers that they want you to answer. So I submitted a concept paper to the Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan Foundation. And these are basically the questions that they ask in their concept paper form. So they ask you to describe the purpose of the project, to give a description of the project, including the rationale for the work, as well as the target population. They are particularly interested in health equity and social determinants of health. So they ask how your project addresses health equity or social determinants of health. And then the last question that they ask in their concept paper is for you to describe the expected impact or outcomes of your work. And you notice that here they have word limits. Not all concept paper forms will be like this. But typically they do have word limits because their goal is for you to write something that's as concise as possible while still conveying what you intend to do. And so this is an example of something that you would write before submitting a full proposal, and usually only organizations that get their concept papers approved can then go on to submit a full proposal. And often you may not be asked to submit anything, but it's still a good idea for you to write about your idea. And so if you are not asked specifically to write a letter of intent or a concept paper, we recommend that you write a one-page summary of your project so that you can talk to program officers about your idea. And so this is what we're going to do during the breakout session. We're going to talk about how you might create a one-pager to talk about your idea. So before I get to that, though, I do want to pause and just answer questions. Does anyone have any questions?
I have a question,
Yes.
and maybe this would be a question for the breakout. But I guess my nonprofit, we do transitional housing, right?
Mhm.
So how in depth do I need to be with the a letter of inquiry or even a proposal for housing, right? I just need the money for the house. So I don't know how to break that down into a detailed proposal.
Okay, so we're absolutely gonna do that in the breakout session.
Okay,
So what we have is a list of kind of specific questions, and each of the leaders will kind of go through the types of questions you should be able to answer if you were just gonna write a one pager. So some things that can come to mind, which we'll talk about in the breakout session, is why does this matter? Like, what is the problem that you're trying to solve, and how are you gonna solve that problem? And so those are the kinds of things that usually you'll want to think about, even if you're not asked to write necessarily. You want to be able to have at least a one pager that describes why you need this housing, that just kind of discusses homelessness and housing insecurity and things like that. You want to be able to set the stage. Oftentimes you'll find that your program officers may not know a lot about the area that you work in, especially if they haven't funded grants like yours before. So I always tell people that you should write about your idea, assuming that the person reading it is a smart person who has no idea what you do. And so it's your job to convince them that you know how to do this work and that this work is needed.
okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
I saw a hand raised, but I couldn't see who it was.
I have a question as well.
Okay, go ahead.
So if the funding agency is not requiring any of the three, would you still suggest the one-page summary for your collaborators and people you may be working with?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
Yes,
you.
so you want to put something in writing. If they do ask for the other pieces, you can give those to your collaborators too. But at minimum, I would at least write a one-page summary so you have a place to start to have conversations with people. Any other questions?
I have a question. In regards to measurable outcomes in the breakout sessions, will you be able to guide us on like what measurable outcomes would be most impactful when you're applying for a grant versus, especially for those who are like newer organizations, more grassroots, so that way we know how to tailor that to our audience?
Absolutely. The other thing, we'll talk about sort of what those outcomes look like. The other thing is that we've done a session before on developing logic models. I'll give everyone links to the recordings of our past sessions. And in the session on logic models, we spend a lot of time talking about outcomes and measuring outcomes in particular. So you may want to view that as well. But we will talk about that in terms of developing the one pager.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? All right.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, good morning. I just joined. Thank you so much for adding me to this Zoom call. I have a very quick question. I run a nonprofit here in Michigan, and I saw this opportunity and immediately jumped on it. I'm already just so many questions in my head. I think my first question is, with this Zoom discussion, is this really only primarily for proposals in grant writing styles? And I think the next question would be, can the tools that are used for grant writing also be applied for if you're doing in-person discussions? Like if you're meeting with people to talk about what your mission is and what you're doing. So are the tools the same if you're sending a proposal in writing and if you're discussing what your mission is in person? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think absolutely you could use the tool. So like if you're writing a one pager that talks about, the mission of your organization, perhaps you kind of talk about, and we'll go through the specifics of how to, the questions that you should be thinking about, but certainly your organization was developed for some reason. And so you can kind of talk about what problems your organization is hoping to address, how your organization is uniquely positioned to address these problems, and kind of what your needs are going forward, things, that you're looking for partners to work with you on, or, the purpose of whatever discussions you're happening and kind of talking about what your next steps. So I think you can absolutely tailor some of these tools to, in the way that you described.
And very quickly, you
Mhm.
mentioned something about making sure that when you present your one pager, that you assume that the person is intelligent, but is not fully aware of what you do. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I would assume, they may not be, depending on what kind of partner or funder you're talking to, they may not be familiar with your topic. So I'll give
Yes,
you-
that exactly. Familiar is
Yeah.
what you stated, because I am in that exact position where
Mm.
we are sending a proposal, and it is a little out of the norm for them to support this. So I saw this and I said, let me jump on this to see if there is something that I can do
Mhm.
to get support from a foundation that generally doesn't do this type of work. But since it's so positive for the community, I believe that they would want to be a part of it.
Mhm. Yeah, and so a lot of what I do, so I do a lot of work that's focused on formerly incarcerated adults, and a lot of funders have never worked with that population. And so usually what I do as a part of my one-page summary, and this is just good practice in general, is to give statistics related to the population that I work with so that people understand why this matters. So, any statistics that you can find related to your topic, including those in your letter of intent or your one-page summary, helps to familiarize your reader with the type of work that you do and why it matters.
With also sources to back because to have a statistic does not mean you also have sourced that statistic. Is
So
that
it should
correct?
be, so it should be sourced. And actually, that's the next thing I'm going to talk about, is getting data relevant to your project. So
Oh, very good. Thank you.
that's what I'm going to talk about.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Any other questions before we go on?
Yes, I have a question.
Okay.
In Genesee County, where I'm at, it seems that a lot of the big money grants that come through
Mhm.
are kind of shared amongst the top leaders in the grant industry, if that makes sense. Like we just had a huge one come through, and the YMCA received it.
Mhm.
How would you recommend grassroots? I'm in my third year.
Mhm.
I have some data. My data does not probably compare very well to a YMCA or YWCA, things like that. How would we be able to kind of shift the balance
Mhm.
and get the opportunity? Because like I said, I think that was $1 million, if not multi-million, $100 million
Mhm.
award that they received, where that could fund so many small grassroots startups
Mhm.
that we could then diversify how that income is streamed throughout the community. I've had an issue breaking in through some of the existing strength that already exists in this. Like I applied through the Mott Foundation, and typically when you already have a good relationship
Mhm.
with some of these grants,
Mhm.
it's easy for them
Mhm.
to award you again because they have the statistics to show, hey, you did good last year, you did good the last 5 years.
Mhm.
When we don't have that history,
Mhm.
what are we to do to get our foot in the door?
This is an excellent question. Thank you so much for asking it. So
Thank
that's why, so this all kind of writing about your idea, a big part of that is why that's important is because you need to develop that relationship with the agencies. So you need to have program officers who know who you are and know what you do. The best thing I can suggest is that you start small. So no organization is going to give you $1 million grant if you're brand new and haven't shown that you can actually deliver. So I would start with smaller grants. Maybe you get a $5,000 grant. Maybe then you step from that to maybe a $20,000 grant, and then maybe after that a $50,000 or $100,000. People want to fund organizations that they know can do the work. Because if the work doesn't get done, then they're not fulfilling their mission. So you want to establish that relationship. And so what I would do actually is kind of do a write-up about your organization, what you do, why it matters. So kind of this one-page summary. And then send it to a program officer and just ask to have a conversation. And so we'll talk a little bit about more specifically about how you do that. But I would say start small, develop a relationship with the program officer, and be able to show people that if given more resources, over time, you can do more work. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you so much.
Other questions?
Follow-up question for that one.
Mhm.
So I will be just starting out personally, but the organization has been around for years. Would you also suggest that I start small when trying to obtain grant?
Does your organization have a history with the funder? Does it have a history of getting grant funding?
Yes.
Okay, so in that case, not necessarily, because what I would do probably is kind of talk to people within your organization who have had success with grants, and they can kind of give you some insight into the types of organizations that might be willing to fund you, or as well as kind of like any tips that they might have for successful grant writing. I don't think if you're part of a large organization that usually receives a lot of dollars, there may be less hesitancy from grant makers. But there could be some hesitancy if you yourself are new to the work. So they want to see that the organization can handle the money responsibly, but also that you know what you're doing. So it might be a little bit easier for you because you work in an established organization, but they still might not want to give you $1 million if you personally haven't shown that you can manage $1 million. So I would err probably on the side of starting smaller, but I think it will be a little bit easier for you as opposed to a more grassroots organization, if that makes sense.
It is. Thank you.
If I can jump in and just ask one very quick question, because I think this is really good what we're talking about. Should we focus the conversation, meaning the actual one pager, presenting it as a product versus what we're trying to fix? Because anything can be funded at any price if the product is attractive to the person we're asking to purchase. Because all of this, I see it as they're buying into something. So my question is, when you talk about starting small, does that also look like structuring our product to meet that, but then not being able to do everything that we want to do within our mission? Because what if our mission says we need these types of dollars to do what our mission states? Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. So I will say that a funding agency's goal isn't necessarily to fund the mission of your organization. You're often not going to see requests for applications for that purpose. They may want to fund one component of what your organization does, but they're often not going to want to fund everything that you do. So a big part of this is making how can we best package our idea such that it's appealing to the funder and what their priorities are, while also advancing our mission. Even if it doesn't meet our mission completely, somehow getting funding for this organization will advance our overall programmatic mission as an organization.
And I think that's great that you said that, because my goal was to go into conversation saying, I'm not looking for you to do everything and meet all the letters in the alphabet, but where can you meet the need?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll also say that usually grant mechanisms have a specific dollar amount attached to them. It's rare that you'll see someone say, hey, just tell me what you need and we'll fund it at whatever dollar amount. So they'll have a specific dollar amount and you'll have to decide what you can do within the range of that dollar amount. That's something that'll be really important.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to pause with questions for now, just because I do want to get to the rest of what we have planned for today.
One more question.
But what I'm going to ask in the breakout sessions, you can ask additional questions as well as we actually go through writing about the grant idea. But I do want to make sure that we have the opportunity to actually go into the breakout sessions. And so if you have other questions, I'm going to ask that we just pause on those for now. And then I'll go through the rest of the presentation. Feel free also to put questions in the chat and we can try and answer them as well. All right, so in terms of approaching a program officer, that's what I want to talk about now briefly. So what you're going to do is write a summary of your idea. So whether it's your letter of intent, your concept paper, your one pager, if the organization has a specific structure that they use, they may not want emails from you. But if it's not clear that they don't accept emails, I would recommend that you send an email to the program officer and attach the summary that you write about your idea and ask them if you can have a phone meeting or a Zoom meeting with them to discuss the idea. Most program officers are happy to have, a 30-minute chat with you to talk through your idea and about how suitable it is for the mission of that funding organization. And so that's sort of a really good way to sort of just introduce yourself to a program officer, get their ear and kind of hear the things that they're thinking about. So we really highly encourage you to approach the program officer. Once you have crystallized your idea a little bit, you want to approach a program officer at that point to see kind of what they think of what you're proposing. So I send a simple email that says, "Dear Dr. So-and-so, I am the executive director of this organization, and we're interested in applying for whatever kind of grant mechanism it is." So funding organizations might have, a healthy children fund or a healthy aging fund or something like that. So you want to kind of identify which grant mechanism you're interested in applying for. And you let them know, I do work on this topic with this population, and our organization has a history of doing work in this area. We've done it for a certain number of years, and now we're going to expand our work further so that we can do this thing that you're proposing in your project. And then you might say, I've attached a summary of our proposed work, and we'd love to meet with you to discuss our idea and determine if it's suitable for the grant mechanism that you're sponsoring. We look forward to hearing from you. So that's a simple email that you can send to introduce yourself. Usually you can go on the website of whatever funding organization you're interested in and find out who the program officers are and get their contact information, and just send them an email with your summary attached to kind of talk about what work you're doing and how it might be relevant to the goals of that funding organization. All right, so this is an example of one that I wrote. So, "Dear Dr. Brown, I'm an assistant professor at Michigan State. I'm applying for the Healthy Aging Grant Program from the Michigan Health Endowment Fund. We want to do nutrition and healthy living programming with older adults. Our organization has done work with older adults for 10 years, and we're excited to expand our work further to do nutrition and healthy living work. I'd love to meet with you to discuss the idea and determine if it's suitable for the Healthy Aging Grant Program. I look forward to hearing from you." So that's a simple email that I would use to kind of introduce myself to a program officer from an organization and kind of show them who I am, what I do, and why I think I should get funding from them. All right, so I'm going to talk very briefly about how you can get data that's going to be relevant to your proposal. So it is important for you to have statistics. You don't have to have a lot, but a few statistics that show why you're interested in studying whatever problem you're interested in and why the work that you do matters. And so you do have to have statistics that you can back up that have been collected that sort of show what's going on in the community that you serve and why your problem is a problem. And so there are a few places that you can look for data, and I'm going to talk about this very briefly. We'll do another session that kind of focuses more on sources of data, but I do want to mention a few, especially for those of you who are local to the Flint community, that you can take a look at. So one way you can get data about the problem you're studying is from in Flint area, we have the Speak to Your Health Community Survey. And so they collect a lot of data on all types of health related problems, as well as things like violence and crime. They even have collected data on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. So the link for their survey is embedded here in the presentation, which you'll get after the session. And you can get all kinds of statistics that show you about problems in the community and identify where there might be disparities that your project might address. Another place that you might want to look is the Greater Flint Health Coalition if you're local. They publish a community health needs assessment every few years. The most recent one was published in 2022. And again, they collect all kinds of data on social determinants of health, healthcare access, sexual health, and lots of other topics. And so that might be a source of data for you as well. And here's the link here where you can click to kind of see all of their publications that have data relevant to a lot of topics. You can also look at the City Health Dashboard, which is maintained by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And they have data for cities all over the country that kind of talks about clinical care, health behaviors, different health outcomes and statistics related to that, all types of social and economic factors. So things like housing costs, school absenteeism, violent crime, etc. And so they gather this data from a lot of different sources. And so you can get data on lots of different cities around the country. So depending on where you live and do work, you may be able to find data related to your topic in the City Health Dashboard. And so this is what the dashboard looks like. And so you literally just enter the name of your city or state here, and then they will give you all kinds of information that might be relevant to the city or state that you work in. Another source of data is the American Community Survey, which is maintained by the US Census Bureau. And they have all kinds of data related to cities and census tracts and states all over the country related to education, employment, housing, income and poverty, etc. So you'll find a lot of statistics that could be relevant for your community. And again, you can zero in particular to whatever community that you work in to find statistics for that community. All right, so that is it for the formal presentation that we have.